Okay, so get this. India is planning this renewable energy park in Ladakh, and it's going to be absolutely massive. I mean, we're talking 13 gigawatts,
Yeah.
enough to power millions of homes. But here's the thing. They're building it way up in the Himalayas, like over 4,700 meters up. That's higher than almost every mountain in the U.S. And to get all that clean energy to where it's needed, they're also proposing this 480-kilometer transmission line, stretching all the way to Haryana.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack the details and the challenges, all based on this recent article we found in the Indian Express.
You know what's really interesting here is that this project is not just about clean energy. It's actually a strategic move by India, especially considering all the tension with China at the border.
Okay, so you're saying there's this whole geopolitical angle to it, but practically speaking, how do you even start building something this massive in such a crazy environment? We're talking extreme temperatures, lots of snow, and they only have a tiny window to actually do the construction.
Yeah, that's where the real challenge is. Just imagine trying to transport equipment that weighs 86 metric tons. That's heavier than a Boeing 737. The roads there just can't handle that kind of weight right now. So they'll have to work with the Border Roads Organization to upgrade the entire infrastructure.
So it's like they're building a road just for this project. That's pretty wild. And then you have this whole other problem, finding skilled workers. I mean, who wants to work up that high in those conditions?
Yeah, and to add to that, bringing workers from other states is really complex. The article said they're going to need about 1,200 workers. So now you have to think about housing them, feeding them, and keeping them safe in a pretty remote and unforgiving landscape.
They don't even forget about security. Being that close to the China border definitely makes you worry about protecting the workers and the infrastructure itself. You can't exactly just call 911 if something happens up there.
Exactly. That's why Power Grid, the company running this whole thing, has asked for 247 security at the site. They'll have to work really closely with the armed forces to come up with a serious security plan. And that coordination just adds another layer of complexity to this whole project.
Yeah, it all sounds incredibly ambitious, maybe even a little daunting. But let's focus on the transmission line itself for a minute. We're talking about a high-voltage direct current link, which I have to admit sounds super high-tech. Why do they need to use that particular technology here?
Well, HVDC is super important for transmitting power over long distances, especially in rough terrain like you see in Ladakh. It helps cut down on energy loss, which is a big deal when you're moving electricity over hundreds of kilometers. Think of it this way. Traditional AC current is like trying to roll a square block. It's really inefficient and loses energy along the way. But HVDC, that's like rolling a smooth sphere. It just glides with much less resistance.
So you're saying it's all about efficiency, making sure as much as that clean energy as possible actually gets to where it needs to go. Okay, that makes sense. But even with the best tech, you still have to deal with those Himalayan mountains.
The article even mentioned avalanche protection structures. Are they really building avalanche-proof power lines?
They are. They can't ignore the potential for avalanches and landslides and all those crazy weather events. It's not just about building a power line. It's about engineering a structure that can withstand anything nature throws at it in one of the most unpredictable environments on Earth.
Wow. Okay, so we talked a lot about the physical challenges, but I'm curious about the money side of things. This project has this huge price tag, 21,000 crore rupees. Is that even possible? I mean, is it financially viable with all these obstacles?
That's the big question, isn't it? The government is giving them a big grant, but there are concerns about the costs going way over budget, especially with all the complexities we've already talked about. And then there's the question of, how are they actually going to make money from this once it's built? All right, someone has to pay for this. So where does the energy market fit in? Who are they planning on selling this electricity to? And at what price?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. This project isn't just about feeding the national grid. It's also about giving Jammu and Kashmir reliable power. I mean, that region has had a lot of power shortages. But the viability of this whole thing might depend on one thing: battery storage.
Battery storage. Okay, now I'm really curious. What does battery storage have to do with making this whole thing financially viable?
Okay, so imagine this. The solar and wind farms are generating a ton of power during the day, but people aren't always using that much energy. So without a way to save that extra energy, it's basically wasted. That's where the 12 gigawatt hour battery storage system comes in. It's like this massive buffer, absorbing all that extra energy and then releasing it when people actually need it.
So it's like a giant rechargeable battery for the entire region, making sure there's always a steady flow of electricity. regardless of the weather or how much energy people are using at a given moment. That actually makes a lot of sense. But I'm guessing building a battery storage system that big comes with its own challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And we can get into all those details after a quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about this huge battery storage system
Yeah.
and how it's supposed to be the key to making this Ladakh project work financially.
Yeah, it's really groundbreaking. You have to think about it. This 12 gigawatt hour battery system wouldn't just be storing energy for this one project. It could actually help stabilize the entire regional grid. We're talking about making renewable energy truly reliable, even when the sun's not out or the wind's not blowing.
So it's not just a power line and some solar panels. It's like they're creating this whole new energy ecosystem with battery storage at the center of it all. But can they actually pull it off? I mean, building a battery system this big takes a lot of expertise and a whole supply chain.
That's definitely a hurdle, and the article brought up some good points about that. India's battery storage capacity is pretty small right now, and a lot of the technology they do have comes from, guess where?
China.
Yep.
Okay, so that adds another layer to this whole geopolitical thing. So is India going to become dependent on China for the very technology that's supposed to make them energy independent?
That's the tough part. They could try to get batteries from other countries, but that'll probably cost more. Or they could use this as a chance to invest in their own battery industry, which could really change the game for them in the long run.
Makes sense. But building that kind of expertise in manufacturing takes time and money. Do you think they'll be able to do it fast enough for this project, especially with such a tight timeline?
It's going to be close. The project timeline is already super ambitious. Any delay with the batteries could affect everything else. And like we said before, delays usually mean the project costs more, which could make the whole thing less financially viable.
Speaking of finances, let's look at the numbers. We know the estimated cost is 21,000 crore rupees. That's a lot of money. The central government is giving them a grant. But where's the rest coming from?
Power Grid is looking for international partners. The article mentioned they're talking to Germany's KfW Development Bank about a line of credit. But even with that, there's still the worry about costs going way over.
Right. The finance ministry even said the project could end up costing 30 to 50% more than they initially thought. That's a big difference.
And you have to remember, we're talking about taxpayer money here. So the government's going to have to justify those costs and prove this project is a good investment.
It sounds like a big risk.
Yeah.
But if it works,
the
payoff could be huge.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine India becoming a global leader in renewable energy, showing everyone they can build these complex projects in the toughest environments and making their energy supply more secure at the same time. It would send a big message.
It would also be a major economic boost for Ladakh, a region that doesn't often get these big development projects. But we can't forget about the people who live there. We talked about this a little before. But how will this project impact the local communities?
That's a crucial question, and it's something they need to think about carefully. One of the big concerns is how it might disrupt the traditional nomadic herding. These communities depend on huge areas of land to graze their livestock, and these solar and wind farms could take over some of that land.
So it's this conflict between modern development and traditional ways of life. Are there any solutions? You can't just tell these communities to move.
No, of course not. The article mentioned a pilot solar project where the panels can be adjusted to different heights so livestock can graze underneath. It's an interesting idea, but it's hard to say if it'll work on a larger scale.
It's a good start. But it shows they need more creative solutions.
Yeah.
And they need to actually talk to the local communities. Those communities need to have a say in how this project happens.
Definitely. And that's where the lack of transparency becomes a problem. The article said someone requested the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment Report, and they were denied because of eco-political sensitivities.
That's worrying. How can you expect people to support something when they don't even know how it's going to affect them and the environment they live in?
It's about finding a balance between national security and the right of local communities to be informed and involved.
It seems like this project is creating as many questions as it's answering. We've talked about the financial risks, the logistics, the potential problems for local communities, and all the unknowns about this battery storage tech.
It's true. But with all that, there's also this excitement about what this could achieve. It's pushing the limits of what's possible in renewable energy. And it could be a model for sustainable development in other challenging places around the world.
So it's high risk, high reward, with lots of potential problems along the way. But before we finish this deep dive, there's one more thing I want to talk about: the bidding process. So we know Siemens Energy and Hitachi Energy are interested. Those are some big names in the energy world. What makes them so qualified for a project like this?
Yeah.
And who else might try to get involved?
Well, both Siemens and Hitachi have done a lot of work with HVDC tech, and they've handled huge infrastructure projects before. They have the experience and the money to take on something this big. As for other companies, it's still early, but we might see other big players get interested, like EBB or GE. They're both involved in renewable energy, too.
So it sounds like there will be some real competition.
Right.
Which is a good thing, right? Competition usually means lower costs and more innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And having these global companies involved could also bring in more investment and help India build their own expertise. In areas like battery storage, it's a chance for India to be a leader in this new field, not just a buyer.
It's interesting to think about how this project could have an impact beyond just Ladakh. If it works, it could really put India on the map as a major force in clean energy. But like we said, there are a lot of ifs.
There are always going to be challenges when you're trying to do something brand new, but that's what makes this so interesting. It's a test to see if we can balance these ambitious clean energy goals with protecting delicate ecosystems and making sure the people who live there actually benefit.
This deep dive has really shown me just how complicated a project like this is. It's not just about the engineering, it's about all these connected issues. Geopolitics, finances, the impact on communities, and environmental sustainability.
It's a reminder that there aren't easy solutions when it comes to climate change, and trying to create a more sustainable world. It takes innovation, working together, and learning from what works and what doesn't.
So for everyone listening, here's what you need to know. This Ladakh project is a story that's still unfolding. It could be a big turning point for India and a model for the rest of the world. But it also has some serious obstacles. Keep an eye on it, because it'll be fascinating to see what happens.
And even if this project doesn't hit every target, it's still pushing the limits. It's starting conversations and driving innovation that will help us all move towards a cleaner, more sustainable future.
Exactly. It's a bold experiment. And the lessons they learn will be valuable, no matter what the outcome is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Wow.
Keep exploring.